For more than a decade, tensions between Great Britain and its American colonies had been steadily increasing. New taxes, military occupation, political protests, and acts of resistance had pushed both sides closer to confrontation. Yet, in the spring of 1775, few people expected a dispute over colonial rights to erupt into a full-scale war. That changed in New England. Long before the Declaration of Independence was signed, before George Washington commanded a national army, and before the colonies even agreed to become independent states, ordinary farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, ministers, and laborers made a choice that altered world history. This episode follows the first year of the Revolutionary War, from the opening shots at Lexington and Concord to Britain's evacuation of Boston, and explores why New England became the birthplace of the American Revolution. The Revolution did not begin overnight. After Britain's victory in the French and Indian War in 1763, the empire gained enormous new territories across North America, but also accumulated staggering debt. To help pay for imperial defense, Parliament imposed a series of taxes on the American colonies, including the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts. Many colonists objected not simply because of the taxes themselves, but because they believed Parliament had no constitutional right to tax people who had no elected representatives in that body. Massachusetts quickly became the center of organized resistance, with Boston emerging as the focal point of protest. Boston's resistance was coordinated, organized, and increasingly confrontational. Merchants organized economic boycotts, political leaders wrote pamphlets, crowds intimidated tax collectors. Organizations such as the Sons of Liberty mobilized public opinion and coordinated acts of protest. British officials increasingly viewed Boston as a city slipping out of imperial control. A confrontation between civilians and British soldiers escalated into violence on a cold March evening. 5 colonists died. Although later investigations showed the event was chaotic rather than premeditated, Patriot leaders, including Paul Revere, transformed it into powerful propaganda. The engraving distributed throughout the colonies portrayed innocent civilians being massacred by disciplined British troops. Whether entirely accurate or not, it profoundly shaped public opinion. When Parliament attempted to rescue the struggling East India Company by allowing it to sell tea directly to the colonies, many Americans believed Britain was attempting to force acceptance of parliamentary taxation. Disguised as Mohawk Indians, dozens of colonists boarded British ships and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The destruction of private property shocked Britain. The response would be swift and severe. Britain hoped to isolate Massachusetts. Instead, it united the colonies. Boston's harbor was closed. Self-government was restricted. Royal authority expanded dramatically. Across America, many colonists concluded that if Parliament could strip Massachusetts of its rights, no colony was safe. By early 1775, Massachusetts was effectively governing itself outside British authority. Local committees replaced royal officials. Militia companies drilled regularly. Weapons, powder, and supplies were quietly stockpiled throughout the countryside. Neither side officially declared war, but both increasingly prepared for one. British military Governor-General Thomas Gage received intelligence that colonial weapons were being stored in Concord. His orders appeared simple: march quietly to Concord, destroy military supplies, return to Boston. Instead, his mission ignited a revolution. Paul Revere did not ride alone. William Dawes departed by land. Samuel Prescott continued spreading warnings after Revere was captured. An extensive communication network involving church bells, signal lanterns, riders, and local committees spread news rapidly throughout Massachusetts. By sunrise, thousands already knew the British were coming. 70 Lexington militia assembled on the village green. Captain John Parker reportedly instructed them not to fire unless fired upon. What happened next remains one of history's greatest mysteries. A single shot rang out. Within minutes, 8 Americans lay dead. The revolution had begun. British troops found fewer military supplies than expected. Meanwhile, colonial militia gathered in increasing numbers. At North Bridge, they advanced toward British soldiers. Unlike Lexington, the Americans stood their ground. The British withdrew. For the first time, colonial soldiers had forced British regulars to retreat. The march back became a nightmare. Militia from dozens of towns fired from behind trees, fences, and stone walls. Fresh companies continually joined the pursuit. British casualties mounted throughout the day. What had begun as a supply expedition became a desperate fighting withdrawal. News spread rapidly across New England. Militia companies marched from every direction: Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. Within days, nearly 20,000 New England soldiers surrounded Boston. The revolution was no longer confined to Massachusetts. Boston became a trapped city. The British controlled the harbor. The Americans controlled nearly every road. Neither side possessed overwhelming strength. Instead, the city entered a tense military standoff that would last almost a year. Technically, Britain won the Battle of Bunker Hill. Strategically, America gained confidence. British victory came at tremendous cost. More than 1,000 British soldiers became casualties. Military leaders realized colonial militia were capable of standing against Europe's finest army. The Continental Congress appointed George Washington commander of the newly formed Continental Army. Washington inherited thousands of volunteers with little organization, inconsistent equipment, and expiring enlistments. His challenge was enormous. He had to transform independent militias into a national army. Young bookseller Henry Knox proposed an audacious plan: retrieve captured British artillery from Fort Ticonderoga, transport dozens of heavy cannons hundreds of miles through winter wilderness, cross frozen rivers, move over mountains. Against incredible odds, Knox succeeded. It remains one of history's greatest logistical achievements. Using Knox's artillery, Washington fortified Dorchester Heights overnight. When British commanders awoke, American cannons overlooked both Boston and the Royal Navy. Remaining in the city had suddenly become dangerous. Rather than launch another costly assault, British commanders evacuated Boston. Ships carrying soldiers and loyalists sailed to Nova Scotia. The siege of Boston ended. The first major American military campaign concluded in victory. The Revolution had survived its first year. Without New England, the American Revolution might never have happened, or it might have unfolded very differently. The resistance that began in Massachusetts drew in neighboring colonies, inspired the Continental Congress, and gave George Washington an army to command. It transformed a constitutional dispute into an armed struggle that eventually produced a new nation. The first year of the war proved that the British Empire was not invincible, and that ordinary citizens, acting together, could challenge one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The road to American independence truly began here, in the towns, villages, farms, churches, and fields of New England.